Today we're going to finish up the notes for chapter 10, photosynthesis. And when we left off in the notes, we were talking about the difference between the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. I guess I called it the light cycle and the Calvin cycle, but anyway, you can see the difference in between them. And we talked about there's 3 different parts to the Calvin cycle. If you want to look here, you get all of it. Here's the phase 1 when I was talking about the carbon fixation, where we're going to have 3 molecules of carbon dioxide come in here. And this is the enzyme Rubisco, stuff you get at Starbucks. Just kidding. And then you get all this going on. Here's that 3GP or whatever they're calling it. And from here, you're going to use some ATP and then end up with ADP, which has to go back and get back to the light and get it fixed. Then you have reduction going on and the outputs. Not a big deal, you guys. I don't expect you to memorize all this, okay? The thing to remember is there's the carbon fixation, reduction, and then regeneration, okay? But really what the Calvin cycle does is this is where we get our organic molecules. And it's very similar to the citric acid cycle, or what they call the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria. This is where things are going to happen. This is, like in the Krebs cycle, we're going to get the glucose totally broken down so that it can move on to one more cycle to get the ATP. Here, we're going to get the glucose made. All right, so this is where it happens. So this is the Calvin cycle. And if you look at it, it looks kind of like the Krebs cycle, that it's circular and there's enzymes that control everything. Okay. All right, so there are some plants that have to do something different for carbon fixation. They live in really hot, arid climates. They don't have enough water, so they have a problem with dehydration. Think of it like a cactus, where the stem is all green, but the leaves really aren't. They have to have trade-offs because of the weather that they live in. And again, evolution has made them work for where they're at. Okay, so they have to have other metabolic processes to help with their photosynthesis. Okay, on hot, dry days, the plants completely close those stromata, those little holes on the bottom, and so that way they can conserve water. But because they're conserving water, it limits photosynthesis. So they can't make as much food as they'd like to because there's not the water available. Okay, closing the stomata also reduces the access to carbon dioxide and oxygen. So oxygen actually builds up, and because we want to release that, but we've closed those holes because we don't want to lose the water. So we don't have as much access to the carbon dioxide, and we have oxygen that builds up. So what happens is we have a wasteful process called photorespiration. All right. And again, this is because we got extra oxygen because we can't let it out, and the carbon dioxide can't get in, and the water can't get in. So something has to happen. Something has to give. Okay. Since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, we burn a lot of fossil fuels. First, we started it as coal, then we discovered oil. We burn a lot of oil, natural gas. We are very bad consumers of fossil fuels. So when you burn fossil fuels, you end up with carbon dioxide and water. So our carbon dioxide levels are way higher than they ever used to be. Excuse me. So because we have an increase in carbon dioxide, there's some plants that don't do well with that. I mean, they need carbon dioxide, but we got more than they need. So it affects what they call their C3 and C4 plants. These plants are relatively, they used to be abundance, but they're going down because of the change in our carbon dioxide levels. They're not really sure what'll happen. We talk about climate change all the time. Some people think it's just a big old farce. But there is a lot more carbon dioxide, and yes, things are getting warmer, and it's actually changing. In North Dakota in the last 30 years, they started planting different plants because they have longer growing seasons. Okay, so this prediction, they don't really know what's happening. They know it's a cause for concern and that we need to do something about it. And I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. We have stronger storms, we have more hurricanes, we have more flooding. We have all these issues because of climate change, and a lot of it is because plants can't deal with the CO2. Okay, there's something called CAM plants, cressolocyan acid metabolism, CAM, we'll just call it CAM. These plants, like succulents, succulents are kind of a big thing now. I know my girls are really into succulents. Succulents are like cacti. They're really thick leaves and they have a lot of water inside or whatever. They help fix carbon. And again, they open their stomata, their little holes in the bottom at night. And so they incorporate CO2 into organic acids, but they work kind of on a different little scale. Okay. They close during the day. So CO2 is released from the organic acids that they use in the Calvin cycle. So it's different because we release CO2. Plants aren't supposed to, but these plants have to because they have too much of it. Okay, so again, we got an issue with carbon dioxide. Okay, so to review photosynthesis, all right, photosynthesis is where energy enters the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are the little green organelles that you find inside plant cells. Their job is to absorb sunlight, take sunlight and change it into chemical energy, and NADH and or DP and ATP. Okay, so we're going to take sunlight and we're going to eventually convert it into organic compounds. Okay, sugar is made in the chloroplasts. It supplies the chemical energy and all the carbon skeletons that we have for our organic molecules in our cells. So we talk about biomolecules, we talk about proteins, we talk about fats, we talk about carbohydrates. Okay, we need those sugars, those carbohydrates, and that's what plants provide for us, and that's what's made in photosynthesis. Okay, plants can store excess sugar. Okay, if they have a lot of sugar, they can store it as starch. That's what a potato is. It's a lot of glucose molecules. Okay, so they can store it in the roots, the tubers. Tubers would be like carrots, things like that. Seeds have excess, and fruits. Fruit is, there's a lot, it's not so much glucose as fructose. But again, it's storing the sugar so that it can be used. When you eat an apple, you get lots of sugar that you can use. It's an organic molecule that we can use, and it goes into your mitochondria and gives you energy. Okay, so in addition to food production, and it doesn't just make food, it also produces oxygen. Important stuff. Without it, we die. So photosynthesis is really important to us. If we didn't have photosynthesis, we would not survive. Okay, here's a little diagram here we got going on. We got, here we got our leaves, and in the leaves we've got if you take a little one of these, is the chloroplast. In the chloroplast is where photosynthesis occurs. We have our two reactions, our light reaction or light cycle, whatever you want to call it. This is where you take energy from the sun and you produce things like ATP and NADPH. Okay, those are the energy. We pop them on over here to the Calvin cycle. Okay, and one of the things that's released by the light cycle, it needs water and absorbs light and it produces oxygen. But then it takes the energy that it made, brings it over to the Calvin cycle, and the Calvin cycle is where we take in carbon dioxide and these energies, and we end up with our organic molecules, our sugars. Okay, that's the big part. Okay, and also starch, which is a storage, but this is where we get our organic molecules, and that's basically photosynthesis. And I think we're done. Oh, got one more slide. Okay, so the light reactions are carried out by molecules in the thylakoid, in those little flattened cells. Their job is to convert light energy into chemical energy, especially ATP and NADPH. They split water and release oxygen. Okay, so the light reaction produces oxygen, takes in light, and gives us energy. The Calvin cycle, the next part of it, takes place in the stromata, in the fluid of the chloroplast. It uses ATP, so it uses what's produced over here, and it converts carbon dioxide into sugars. Okay, and then it'll take these guys, because now they're missing a phosphate group, it'll send them back here and they'll add it back on. So they keep recycling. This part is like the skeleton part, and we can just keep adding a phosphate bond over here and then bring it over here. Use the energy. Oh, we're done. Whoa, back over here. So it continues to go back and forth and back and forth. That's the difference between those two. Okay, so that's it for photosynthesis. We are now done with chapter 10, and we're actually done with unit 2. So it's time for reviewing and to take another test.